Well, good morning. So this morning I just want to talk about one of the things that I've been working on lately. So without further ado, the externalization of the self. McLuhan, Nietzsche, and the age of fragmentation. So a dimly lit study filled with books, a flickering desk lamp casting shadows. The narrator, dressed in neutral tones, sits at a desk, flipping through a copy of Understanding Media, and thus spake Zarathustra. The camera lingers on underlined passages before the narrator speaks. There was a time when we lived in a world rich with depth, where knowledge was layered, experiences were embodied, and wisdom was something earned. But now, we live in an age of acceleration, where attention is currency and simplicity is power. Have we, in our pursuit of technological progress, externalized ourselves to the point of losing touch with who we are? Montage of clips of people scrolling on their phones, watching repetitive YouTube videos, doom scrolling, engaging with short-form content, corporate meetings filled with buzzwords, news segments that flatten complexity into digestible soundbites, losing all meaning and value. Nietzsche warned of this in his Thus Spake Zarathustra. He foresaw the coming of the last man, a being so accustomed to comfort and predictability that he no longer aspires. So, the externalized self. Have we lost ourselves? There was a time when people lived in stories, in layered meanings, in depth. But now, we live in a world of soundbites, of flattened realities, of repetition. The same YouTube intro, the same corporate buzzwords, the same social media trends, a world where even our arguments are pre-scripted, slotted neatly into pre-approved ideological categories. And I can't help but wonder, have we externalized ourselves so much that we can't find our way back? Nietzsche warned us about this in Thus Spake Zarathustra. He describes the last man, a being who no longer struggles, no longer aspires, no longer reaches for anything beyond comfort. The last man does not suffer because he has anesthetized himself against depth. He does not question because questioning disrupts his peace. He is content in his shallowness. But contentment, Nietzsche suggests, is not life. It is the end of life, the final flattening of the human experience into mere existence. But Nietzsche wasn't the only one who saw this coming. Marshall McLuhan, writing in the 60s, saw how our tools shape us. He argued that every new medium is an extension of ourselves, a tool. But with every extension, there is an amputation. If we're not careful, we allow our humanity to be replaced by these tools, and in so doing, we become the tool. Writing extended our memory, but weakened our oral traditions. And fast forward to today, our writing is no longer timeless. It has a expiry date because of the internet and because of social media. So we're no longer timeless. As McLuhan wrote about us, that writing made us a timeless being because it allowed us to speak to other generations and other geography. That is slowly atrophying. The clock gave us precision, but severed us from natural rhythms. And I use that as an example. There's an oft-quoted thought experiment in philosophy. If you were, say, trekking through the mountains one day and you kicked a pocket watch and you've never seen a watch before, how would you justify how that was produced or created? Another example I use is digital watches, clocks, almost replaced mechanical. And it was actually the aesthetic in us, the love of beauty and complexity. Funny how we also love to flatten everything, but we have a love for complexity. Our love for complexity is what saved the mechanical watch. But I argue there's still a major use case for the mechanical watch. Right? In northern climes on our planet, well, digital watches, batteries, not easy to come by. Solar, not enough sun. So there's still a use case in a number of situations where our old technology of the mechanical watch still is the best tool for the job. And now, social media extends our communication but amputates our attention. Digital tools give us infinite access to knowledge, but they flatten that knowledge into trivia. Worse, obfuscate the truth. We are hyper-connected, yet deeply alienated. The internet is miles wide, but millimeters deep. We're always looking outward, rarely looking in. And here's the question I keep coming back to. If we externalize ourselves so much, our memories to machines, our conversations to algorithms, our identities to curated online personalities and profiles, what happens when there is no inside left to return to? Or worse, what we're living today, this identity crisis, when people have no idea what is truly them. They can identify pieces, but they don't know the whole. What if, as McLuhan might suggest, we have amputated the very thing that makes us human? Or as Nietzsche suggested, we may have confused our nature to the point that we will have to back translate just to know ourselves. There's a danger here, not just of distraction, not just of mindless entertainment, but a deeper kind of loss. A loss of depth, a loss of instinct, a loss of the ability to engage with the world as it is, not as an abstraction, not as a brand, not as a prepackaged ideology, but as something living, complex, contradictory, even messy. Something that requires effort to understand, a depth. And maybe that's the problem. Effort. Depth demands work. It demands that we sit in discomfort, that we resist the easy answer, that we stay with a question longer than a few seconds before scrolling away. As Thomas Merton said, he came into the Trappist monastery, a literary critic and an older man, and yet he noticed things. One was that he found the novice monks were leaning up against the wall and they seemed to be struggling, stretching, yearning for answers to their questions. But he found the older monks sat comfortably with those same questions, not as disturbed by the answers or even the lack of. So, everything in this modern world is designed to pull us in the opposite direction. Not towards ease, in the sense of contentment and completeness, a wholeness, but towards a repetition, towards passivity, towards apathy. The world does not ask you to think, it asks you to react. This is Nietzsche's ressentiment. He took it from the French because we re-sentiment. It is resentment in the sense that this resentment of our lot has us so calloused to the real world that we don't realize that it is the vicissitudes, the challenges, the difficulty of life that truly makes up who and what we are. And by forgoing our humanity, by forgoing our struggles, by forgoing our disease, we forgo our humanity. So it isn't simply technology that denatures who we are, robs us of our humanity. We allow it to. But it's even our own lack of engagement, faith, trust in most languages is devotion and commitment. But for many of us, it's the thing we sorely lack. So, this world just asks you to react. It does not ask you to seek meaning. It hands you a pre-approved narrative. I talked about this when J. Krishnamurti dissolved the Order of the Orient Star. He said it's because religions so often become a placeholder for this search for meaning, when really a religion should be the scaffolding that we use to support this come to knowing, this coming to being. As Nietzsche said, make yourself your greatest creation. Because we're the arbiters of meaning, of value, of creation. This is the Schätzen that I've talked about in German. That is us. We are this complex of all of our experiences, of all of our thoughts, all of our preferences, and the interaction with our world and everyone else. We are a networked being in a sense that, as Martin Buber said, you can't know who you are without the other. That's Jung's individuation. And until we realize that it's not just individual authenticity, but it's authenticity within the whole that is required. And our identity crisis doesn't flow simply from a selfish wish to be this, that, or the other thing, but it also flows from the lack of authenticity in our interactions, in our world. And, right, as Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage and we're but actors upon it. Sadly, if that's true, then we can never come to know who we truly are. Right, as the Greeks said, know thyself, know thesoton. And Nietzsche wrote about this. He found the Greeks were obsessed with theater and narrative and plays, rhetoric. Not the way we are in this sort of age. It wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't about style. It wasn't about ego. It was about coming to know themselves. The early Greeks were trying to heal trauma, trying to understand themselves and the world and suffering and their lot. Sadly, many of us go to entertainment now to be distracted from, not from the pursuit of meaning, but many of us have this ennui. As Carl Jung said, a good 20% of his clientele suffered from this unattributable malaise. And I argue it's not the lack of meaning now that I've come to realize. It's the fact that many of us only know that we aren't partaking in something that we know we should be, but we don't know what it is. Anumana, or the numana in Sanskrit, or phronesis in Greek, this idea that we need to reawaken to knowledge that we already had but had forgotten. So what do we do? Do we reject technology? Do we abandon media altogether? No, that's not the answer. McLuhan understood that media is not good or bad. It simply is. The key is awareness. The key is knowing when we are being shaped by forces we don't even recognize. As Carl Jung said, right? If we don't deal with our unconscious, it will manifest in our lives and we will call it fate. Or as Neil Postman said, the news is simply propaganda punctuated by headlines, and it's only gotten worse. It means reclaiming our depth, our nuance, our ability to see beyond the algorithm. It means resisting the flattening, even when it's easier to conform. I argue in the Christian context. Christians talk a lot about being persecuted, but I think that ignores an earlier truth. That if you look in the Torah, the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 5:29 in the Christian Bible, or 5:26 in the Torah, it speaks that we will have to set ourselves apart because we were endowed with the ability to know right from wrong and a heart to want to see that fulfilled in the world. And that will set us aside from the pagans and the idolaters and the hedonists in this world. You don't have to believe in God to, as Bishop Barron said in a recent talk, to understand that there's something greater than yourselves. That's either your family, your children, your community, the greater good. It doesn't matter what you call it. But if you worship at the idol of the self, this is another lesson of Buber's I and thou. If you treat yourself as the divine and everything else as an it, well, you've denatured yourself in the world. And I wonder if there's any hope for you. I argue this is why many people turn to psychedelics. It is a shortcut to get this experience of ego recontextualization. But it's the integration that matters most. And I find that's what's sorely lacking in this world today, right? So what do we do again? As I said, the key is knowing when we're being shaped by the forces we don't even recognize. This is this unconscious, but also propaganda, also Nietzsche's ressentiment. You need to be present and aware in the place. Nishitani's basho, Jung's place. This is being prepared for action and being in the place of action. Right? It means reclaiming our depth, our nuance, our ability to see beyond the algorithm. It means resisting the flattening, even when it's easier to conform. All that is a lot of words that just mean be true to yourself, be authentic. That's the trick. So Nietzsche spoke of our self-overcoming. He believed that to truly live, we must constantly transform ourselves, question our assumptions, push beyond our limitations, refuse to settle. This is his transvaluation of all values. But also, in a sense, he argued for us to embrace everything in our lives as ordered, his eternal return, the eternal recurrence, this amor fati, to love your fate, is his solution. That if no matter what came our way, the weal and the woe, if we accepted it as our lot, embraced it, worked with it, treated it as our destiny, then that's the lesson of Job. That's the lesson of gratitude. That's the lesson of Heraclitus, this idea of if you don't have what you want, just want what you have. It's as simple as that, but also an endless struggle to get right. Always, as Nietzsche says, reevaluating. It's our telos, but it's also our telemetry, right? It's our way of being, it's our path, but it's also our guidance and our guide. So maybe in a world that demands we become the last man, the most radical act is to refuse to stay deep when the world wants us shallow, to engage when the world wants apathy, to grow rather than to atrophy. Did I say atrophy rather than apathy? My apologies. To seek complexity when the world offers simplicity. To be human in a time when everything is pushing us towards becoming something less. I've talked about this before. Ian McGilchrist's book, Master and His Emissary. Wonderful book. Highly recommend it. But what I see every day in podcasts is people don't seem to understand his idea. Long story short, we have a left and a right hemisphere, right and left. We should be using those hemispheres in a balance. What the Buddha would call madhyamaka, a middle way. Because the left and the right are arguably two different beings. It really could be seen in Jung's idea of the anima and the animus. We have two conflicting, the yin and the yang. And Ian McGilchrist's theory is that we live in a world that is left hemisphere obsessed, concentric, and maybe even trapped. And I myself am the opposite. I am a right brain creature, almost to my detriment. I use very little of my left in a lot of sense. Not just me, but even my dyslexia shows this, that dyslexics tend to use the right to make up for deficiencies in the left, but I do have a whole separate idea, my obsession with unsolvable questions, my love of a whole picture, my problem-solving abilities, my ability to see the bigger picture. A lot of these qualities are right brain qualities. But I'm blessed in the sense that I'm not saddled with the same problems as many of these left brain people are, but I have my own issues being stuck in the right. Again, it's about trying to find that middle way. So, as we close, let's stay deep when the world wants us to be shallow. Seek complexity when the world offers simplicity. To be human in a time when everything is pushing us towards becoming something less. The abyss is staring into us. The question is, will we stare back? Right? As Jung said, one of my favorite quotes from Carl Jung, from Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he says, "The modern man stands at the edge of a void. This void is the potential." Right? Remember, status quo is the way things are, not the way they could be or the way they should be. So truly, the modern human being, the modern person, pardon me, the modern parlance, the modern person is meant to step into the void and challenge himself, and narratives, traditions, expectations. Most of all, challenge themselves, challenge others. And the greatest of these challenges, of faith, hope, and love, but above all else, is authentic engagement with what matters. And truly, we do know what matters.